Part 2, Crossing the Border. When I was a little boy, I lived in an old house, and there was a legend that a treasure was buried in it somewhere. It cast a spell over that whole house. My house hid a secret in the depths of its heart. Yes, I said to the little prince, whether it's a house or the stars or the desert, what makes them beautiful is invisible. Chapter 6, Silent Fireworks. Our trip had a soundtrack, like a film or a music video. Angel played his shoebox full of tapes, cumbia, salsa, merengue, a background to the scenery out the window and the antics in the van. I liked the music. When it was on, I couldn't stay wrapped in my separate world. The pulsing beats pulled me like gravity into the planet of the van. Surrounded by the music, I felt like someone else, riding into unknown territory, some adventurous woman in a movie. Early that first morning, we passed through Nogales, the border town, which was already packed with people selling things. Cars bumper to bumper, horns honking, music blaring from all directions. After we got through, we stopped to register the van with the police and pay fees. I stayed in the van reading while Pablo ran around the parking lot and Angel and Dika and Mr. Lorenzo talked to the officials at the booth. They were a strange sight. Dika looking large and pink and nearly naked in her white tennis shorts and sapphire tank top next to Mr. Lorenzo in his quilted flannel shirt, which he seemed to wear all the time, and Angel in his sunglasses and baseball cap and chains. By the time we started driving again, the sun was high overhead, burning my skin through the window. For lunch, we ate food that Dika and I had prepared before the trip. Ham sandwiches, apples, chips, and for dessert, fruitcake. She adored fruitcake. The bright green and red bits of candied fruit thrilled her. She brought 9 tins along, and when Mom had accused her of going overboard, she shrieked, "But 5 of them are gifts!" Outside the window, the dry brown earth met an endless stretch of hazy sky. Patches of green were few and far between. Every couple of miles we passed a cluster of cement block houses in various stages of construction, some painted pink or blue in a failed effort to cheer things up. The signs also tried to make things seem less hellish. Jesus' junkyard, God's gas station. Once in a while, we passed smoldering trash fires at roadside and giant lots of rusted cars and machine parts. It turned out that Angel did like to talk, as long as it wasn't about his mother's buried jewels. He told me after a story about all the crazy things he'd seen and done. He had a way of making his stories sad and funny and exciting all at once. He talked about the dog he'd had in Guatemala, who was so smart he could say words in Mayan. About how, when he was a little kid, he fell backward into a giant pot of chicken soup over the fire and burned his butt and had to sleep on his stomach for a week. Pablo giggled at his stories tentatively, trying out this laughing thing. Late that afternoon, Pablo rummaged through my pillowcase, then quietly dropped into my lap a book of poetry by Pablo Neruda, his favorite, mainly, I suspected, because they had the same name. At first, I said no, too embarrassed to read in front of Angel. But Pablo pleaded, so I agreed to read a few stanzas about slicing a lemon and how the lemon was really a cup of miracles, a universe of gold. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Angel staring. I wondered if behind the sunglasses he was watching my lips move as intently as Pablo was. "More!" Pablo said once I finished. I shook my head, glancing at Angel. He took off his seatbelt and wedged himself on his knees between the front and back seats and said, "We beg you." Pablo giggled, and I flipped a few pages to a poem about a diver who floats up from his underwater pit of solitude and gets reborn. As Angel and Pablo listened intently, I forgot about being an amoeba and became part of the little cluster of cells in this van. When the sun dropped low and the light grew gentle, we stopped in a dusty small town for dinner. Restaurant Fanny, the sign ran. We sat at a little table covered with torn plastic tablecloth with a red flower design. After our food came, the owner, Fanny, came over and apologized about the flies buzzing around us. Before I knew what was happening, she was enthusiastically spraying bug repellent over our tacos. Naturally, my fear of being poisoned fear was activated. "Stop!" My voice sounded shrill. I tried to steady it. I tried to think of a legitimate excuse. "I'm allergic to that." She gave me a strange look and a half-hearted, "Sorry, señorita," and moved to another table. "Oh, Sophie," Tika said, "you have allergy to everything. In USA, everyone have allergy. In my country, no. We are strong." And she went on and on about how Americans were allergy wusses. As she talked, I could almost feel my throat closing up. There were no windows in the restaurant, so the toxic odor of bug spray lingered. I squeezed lime all over my food, drenching it, although I figured maybe the bug spray had killed some germs on contact, too. "How much lime you are going to put on that?" Dika asked, her eyes wide. I ignored her. Angel came to my defense. "Lime's good for you. Lots of vitamin C, right, Lime Girl?" Dika laughed. A snort that blew Pepsi out her mouth. "Lime Girl!" But Mr. Lorenzo nodded, serious. "In my country, we use the limes like medicine, for the sore throat and the cough and the cold, for anything." I appreciated that Mr. Lorenzo stood up for me. He was quiet and shy and didn't talk much, just gave Dika soft-eyed looks every so often. Lime Girl is what Angel started calling me, and I didn't mind it. I'd never had a nickname before. If someone gave you a nickname, it meant you were part of an organism. Later in the van that night, "Hey, Lime Girl, turn up the music. Lime Girl, pass me some cookies. Lime Girl, look, an armadillo." Dika burst out laughing every time he said Lime Girl. Her shrieks and laughter were another part of the soundtrack. When Mr. Lorenzo passed another car, for the brief moments we were in the lane of oncoming traffic, she gripped the door handle, threw one hand over her mouth, widened her eyes. "My God! My God!" she squealed until we were safely back in our lane. Who knew why she shifted to German? Mr. Lorenzo put his hand on her thigh for a moment. "Calm down. Is okay, miss." Calling a 60-year-old miss seemed ridiculous, but she ate it up. She looked out the window and smiled with such clear-eyed pleasure it was hard to stay irritated with her. The first night we stopped outside a little coastal town called San Carlos, so close to the ocean you could smell the salty, fishy breezes. Dika wanted to spend the night right on the beach so that she could work on her tan the next morning, but I reminded her we'd promised Mom and Juan we'd go straight to Pablo's village with no delays, no distractions, no sidetracking. Dika shook her head. "Oh, you must have more fun in the life, Sophie." At the roadside next to a cluster of low, spiky cacti, we raised the van's pop-top to sleep. Me and Dika on the bottom bunk, Mr. Lorenzo and Angel above us, and Pablo on a sleeping bag on the back seat. My body was squeezed to about a foot of the bed, while Dika's body spread out like rising dough, pushing me to the edge. Lying there, trying to sleep, I worried that the upper bunk would collapse onto us. After Dika started snoring and some loud asthmatic breathing came from the upper bunk, there was a movement above and then a pressure on my thigh. "Oops, sorry, Lime Girl." Angel moved his foot and dropped down from the upper bunk. "Didn't mean to step on you." He didn't have his sunglasses on or a shirt, just the gold chains that glinted light from somewhere. Until that moment, I'd never caught a glimpse of his eyes, always the mirrored glasses reflecting my own face. There were tiny laugh wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. They seemed raw, vulnerable. As he opened the van door, a little trail of sparks flew in his wake, maybe static from his clothes and the sleeping bag. While he was outside, I felt a warm spot where his foot had touched the sheet over my thigh. When he came back through the van, he left another small trail of sparks, silent, miniature fireworks. The next morning, Angel asked me questions as though he was really interested in me. What is your favorite thing to do, Sophie? What are your dreams? Do you like morning or night best? What are you reading? What's it about? Then he asked if he could braid my hair. You know how to braid hair? This surprised me. My mother taught me when I was little. I used to braid her hair. Angel braiding my hair sent tingles from my scalp down to every cell in my body, and then a wave of warmth that made me want to melt back into him. He smoothed my hair and parted it down the middle. I hadn't worn my hair in 2 braids for ages. His fingers sectioned off the chunk of hair into 3 parts, gently pulling it taut and working his way down with quick, careful fingers. He wrapped a rubber band around the first braid and moved on to the second. I wished he would slow down to make it last longer. You know what your hair's like, he said? That silky part of the corn when you peel back the husk. I swallowed hard, afraid to break the spell. After he wrapped the rubber band on the second braid, he ran his hand down its length and said, It's not even. Let me do this one again. Your niece is very pretty, Mr. Lorenzo said to Dika that afternoon, like her great aunt. Oh, Mr. Lorenzo, Dika slapped his shoulder, like her mother. Sometimes when old people look at me, they say I am on the road to looking like my mother. I attribute it to cataracts. But she doesn't have boyfriend, Dika lamented. Her eyes flicked at me in the mirror. She winked. She was playing matchmaker. I looked out the window past the rolling hills to the Sierra Madre Mountains and hoped Dika would drop it before Angel woke up. No boyfriend, Mr. Lorenzo said dramatically. I glanced at Angel, and luckily his breathing was still steady, his lips slightly parted, his head against the other window.